Hi there, I'm just a little cat trying to reach my first 1,000 subscribers. It's free. Just click subscribe right under this video. It would mean the world to me.
On my 38th birthday, I ate cold Chinese leftovers on my couch, watched reruns of shows I've seen 100 times, and responded to exactly 0 birthday texts. Because I didn't get any. I didn't cry. I didn't even sigh. I just scrolled through Instagram like any normal, lonely idiot. Until I saw my younger brother being hoisted into a goddamn helicopter by my entire family in matching coordinated outfits. That's when I snapped. On my 38th birthday, which landed on a cloudy Tuesday that felt more like a Monday someone forgot to label properly, I found myself sitting on my faux leather couch in my one-bedroom apartment, wrapped in the kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful or relaxing but rather hollow. Like the world forgot to include you in the background noise. I wasn't expecting anything. Not a call, not a card, not even one of those lazy HBD texts that people send out of obligation more than care. And it's not because I'd alienated my family or wronged them in some dramatic soap opera kind of way. No, it was worse than that. It was just 10 years of being quietly overlooked, dismissed, and emotionally downgraded to something like an afterthought, as if I were an extra in a movie starring my younger brother as the hero, the golden boy, the one whose every minor achievement deserved a banner, a cake, and a multi-paragraph Facebook post dripping in filtered pride. That day, I heated up leftover General Tso's chicken from the night before, poured myself a glass of Cabernet that had been open too long to still qualify as decent, and queued up old episodes of The Office, because the idea of watching anything that required emotional investment felt like too much. The hours passed slowly, not because they dragged, but because they blended together into a kind of hazy indifference. And by the time the sun dipped below the gray skyline, I had resigned myself to what I already knew deep down, that no one in my family had remembered. Or worse, they had remembered and just didn't care enough to reach out. Both options stung, but one of them felt like a deeper betrayal, and I wasn't sure which one I hated more. You might think I sound bitter, and maybe I am, but bitterness doesn't grow out of nowhere. It builds year after year, disappointment after disappointment, until it calcifies into something solid and sharp that lives just beneath the skin. It wasn't always like this. I remember birthdays as a kid, streamers in the kitchen, homemade cakes with crooked frosting, my mom singing off-key while my dad filmed the whole thing with a camcorder he barely knew how to use. Those memories are real, and I cling to them sometimes when I'm trying to convince myself that I didn't imagine a time when I was loved out loud. But somewhere around my late 20s, that energy shifted. Ryan, my brother, started getting more attention, partly because he was younger and flashier, but mostly because he gave our parents something to brag about. He launched a tech startup out of college, dated women who looked like they lived at Pilates studios, and bought a condo with a rooftop view that my mother still hasn't stopped mentioning even though it's been 5 years. Meanwhile, I chose stability. I became a marketing strategist, worked hard, paid my bills, never got arrested, never asked for money, never had a crisis that made the family group chat implode, and apparently, that made me forgettable. Because people like me don't make waves. We show up, we clap for other people. We smile when we're tired and say we're fine even when we're not. And after a while, folks assume we don't need anything, including birthday wishes. It's not that I expected a grand gesture. I'm not 13. I wasn't hoping for balloons, or a surprise party, or even a dinner reservation, but a text would have been nice. A 2-minute call, something to say, "Hey, you're still on our radar." But by 8:30 that evening, as I sat curled under a blanket with my laptop warming my thighs and a vague ache building behind my eyes, I realized no such message was coming. That's when I opened Instagram. Now I've learned the hard way that Instagram is not a safe place for people feeling even slightly fragile, especially when your family has a flair for the performative and a complete lack of self-awareness. Still, I opened the app because I needed something to break the numbness, even if it was rage. And rage, as it turned out, was exactly what I got. There, at the top of my feed, was my mother's profile. She had posted 8 photos in a row, all tagged with #RyanTurns35 and accompanied by captions that made me want to laugh and scream at the same time. The first picture was of Ryan, grinning like a toothpaste commercial, climbing into a helicopter that had "Happy Birthday, Ryan" printed across the side in vinyl. The next view showed my parents, his girlfriend, and a handful of friends all smiling like they'd just won a contest for best-looking family. There were charcuterie boards, champagne flutes, someone holding a custom cake shaped like a helicopter, and even a photo of a gift box with a Rolex peeking out. My mom had written, "Couldn't be prouder of the amazing man you are. Love you forever, baby boy. Happy birthday," with 3 red hearts and a damn sparkle emoji. That's when something inside me went silent. Not numb like before, but cold, clinical, and terrifyingly focused. Because this wasn't just forgetting. This wasn't just slipping up. This was choosing. They had chosen him, again, loudly, publicly. They had chosen to celebrate him with theatrics and hashtags and joy. While my birthday came and went like a silent funeral, no one bothered to attend. And it wasn't about the helicopter or the money or the godforsaken cake. It was about what it meant. It was about the message behind it, the years of built-up neglect that finally crystallized into a single moment I could point to and say, "Here, this is where it broke." And as I sat there, phone in hand, screens still lit with their perfect smiles, I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I didn't call Claire or draft a long, emotional text I'd never send. I just closed the app, leaned back on the couch, and stared at the ceiling with a blankness that scared even me. Because I knew right then, I couldn't let it go this time. This year, I wasn't going to pretend it didn't matter. This year, they were going to remember me. Just not the way they expected. There's a moment in every family where the truth slips through the cracks, not as a dramatic confession or some kind of explosive showdown, but as a quiet, unmistakable realization that something you've suspected all along, something you've tried to downplay, excuse, or explain away with logic, isn't just true, it's deliberate. That moment, for me, came as I sat staring at a filtered photo of my brother grinning like a victorious prom king while boarding a private helicopter, my parents beaming behind him as if this was the natural culmination of a lifetime of achievements, as if he had earned a throne in the clouds while the rest of us were expected to clap from the ground. There was no caption that said, "We forgot Danielle's birthday again." They didn't have to. The message was carved in every smiling face, in every wine glass raised in celebration, in every ounce of effort they had put into making his 35th something to remember, while mine was treated like it had never happened at all. I scrolled through the carousel of images, one after another, each one another subtle punch to the ribs. There were candid shots of my mom hugging Ryan like she'd just welcomed him home from war. My dad, who rarely shows emotion beyond the occasional grunted approval, clinking a glass of champagne with a soft expression I hadn't seen directed at me since I was in high school, and even a group photo of Ryan's friends holding up a custom sign that read, "Flying high for Ryan." Claire always jokes that our family runs like a marketing agency, always branding every moment for maximum Instagram engagement. But in that moment, the joke didn't feel funny. It felt cuttingly accurate. The entire event looked like it had been coordinated by a team of professionals, right down to the matching navy and white outfits and the aerial adventure hashtags that made me want to delete every app on my phone and disappear. But the real breaking point wasn't the helicopter. It wasn't even the Rolex or the champagne. It was the comment section. Dozens of messages from family friends, co-workers, extended relatives. "This is amazing. Y'all are the best family. So proud of Ryan," all of them feeding into this fantasy my mother had crafted over the years, where Ryan was the sun and we were all planets grateful to orbit him. No one asked where I was. No one noticed that the person who shared their blood, who had quietly existed at the edge of every family gathering, every Christmas card, every group vacation, had been erased from this narrative with the precision of someone deleting unwanted files. It was as if I didn't exist. And the worst part? I had let it happen, not once, not twice, but for years. I thought about the birthdays I'd spent alone before this one, the dinner for one at a chain restaurant, because I couldn't justify cooking a meal I'd be too numb to enjoy. The flowers I once sent to myself at work, just to avoid the sting of watching every other desk get deliveries. The time I baked my own cake and pretended it was fun, like some quirky, independent woman trope I'd seen in a movie. I remembered the year I tried to throw a small dinner and my mother called to say they'd be out of town, but maybe next weekend. I remembered how Ryan had accidentally scheduled his product launch on my birthday 3 years ago, and how Mom had called to ask if I could be understanding because he was under so much pressure. And every time, I'd swallowed it. I'd told myself it wasn't worth the drama. I'd reminded myself that birthdays weren't everything, that being forgotten didn't mean I wasn't loved. But as I looked at those pictures, at the spectacle they had orchestrated, it hit me. Not only had they remembered Ryan's birthday, but they had planned it weeks in advance. They had booked a private tour, coordinated outfits, customized signage, and flown in guests. That didn't happen by accident. That wasn't a spontaneous gesture. That was intention. And intention, when wielded without inclusion, becomes erasure. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. What I felt was colder than anger and heavier than sadness. I felt clarity. Later that night, I called Claire because she's the only person who doesn't tell me I'm overreacting when I start unraveling like this. She listened, as she always does, without trying to fix it, letting me pour it all out until my voice got tight and I fell into silence. When I told her about the helicopter ride, she let out a dry, unimpressed laugh and said, "Of course he got a helicopter. Why not just give him a crown and call it a day?" But then she paused, and in the kind of low, measured voice she reserves for serious ideas, the ones she knows I'll resist before ultimately realizing she's right, she said, "You know, you don't have to yell to be heard. There are other ways to make a point. Subtle ways, smart ways, the kind of ways they can't spin back at you." I knew what she meant, and I also knew I'd never survive another year of pretending I was okay with being invisible. So I stayed up that night, not crying, not spiraling, but thinking, strategizing. I thought about what my parents valued: status, perception, public opinion. I thought about what Ryan valued: recognition, control, applause. I thought about what would rattle them just enough to notice me, not in a screaming match kitchen table kind of way, but in the kind of way that forced them to sit with their discomfort, to realize that their erasure hadn't gone unnoticed, that I was done playing the quiet daughter who always understood, who always forgave. I opened my laptop, pulled up a document, and started typing ideas. Claire was right. I didn't need to yell. I just needed to choose my moment. And I already knew what it would look like. Some forms of revenge are loud, impulsive, reckless. Explosions meant to satisfy a bruised ego, or avenge a wounded pride in the heat of the moment. But what I felt wasn't rage in that typical chaotic sense. It was slower, quieter, something measured and oddly peaceful, like the slow turning of a lock. You've been too tired to jiggle for years, finally realizing the door was never actually stuck, just waiting for the right kind of silence to open. I didn't want to fight with them. I didn't want to yell or cry or craft a monologue they'd barely listen to. I wanted them to see it, to feel it, and to sit in it long enough that they couldn't explain it away with their usual soft focus excuses about being busy or assuming I was celebrating with friends or just not knowing what I would have wanted. I wanted them to see themselves as clearly as I finally saw them, and I wanted them to feel the exact weight of being forgotten. That's when the idea came to me. It wasn't sudden. It was more like a whisper that built into something undeniable, and the more I sat with it, the more perfect it felt. Not because it was mean or dramatic, but because it would hit them right where it mattered most, their self-image. See, my mother doesn't care about money in the way some people do. She doesn't flaunt designer brands or hoard wealth. But she does care, deeply and unrelentingly, about how she's perceived by others. Her entire life has been curated through a filter of likability and suburban martyrdom. This cultivated image of the kind mother, the community giver, the woman who supports all causes equally as long as they don't threaten her sense of moral control. She donates to food drives, yes, but only the name brand items, and only if they're being collected by the church. She'll support local fundraisers, but the ones run by people she knows, people who might thank her by name in the printed program. She calls it humility, but it's really vanity with better manners. And then there's Ryan, whose philanthropic energy starts and ends with liking a charity post on Instagram during Giving Tuesday. He plays the role of the generous young entrepreneur because it suits the story he wants to tell. That he's successful and socially conscious, a man of business and heart, someone who gives back, even though in reality, he wouldn't spend 15 minutes volunteering unless a camera was involved. So when I remembered an incident from a few years back, where Mom got into a not-so-subtle argument during Thanksgiving dinner over a controversial LGBTQ+ youth shelter opening in our town, I knew I had my target. She had called it a risky influence, said she just wasn't sure those kids belonged in residential neighborhoods, and although she stopped short of saying something overtly hateful, her tone was laced with that specific kind of moral superiority that makes your skin crawl, as though her discomfort should dictate who gets to exist where. I never forgot it. So I went online, found the shelter, still running, still fundraising, still desperately undersupported, and made the decision that felt like alignment in every bone of my body. I donated $10,000 in their name, not my name, theirs. I split it evenly, $5,000 in honor of Susan and $5,000 in honor of Ryan, writing clearly in the dedication note, given in recognition of Susan and Ryan Carter's ongoing commitment to inclusion, equity, and uplifting marginalized youth in our community. I knew it would be posted publicly. I knew it would show up on the organization's donor wall, on their newsletter, and in their annual fundraising summary. That wasn't a side effect. That was the point. Once the donation processed, I sat there staring at the confirmation email, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not triumph, not vindication, but a stillness, like I had finally exhaled after holding my breath for a decade. I took a screenshot of the receipt, clean, clear, with every detail visible, and posted it on Facebook with a simple caption. Felt right to do something meaningful this year. Happy birthday to me. No hashtags, no direct tags. Nothing overtly accusatory. Just a digital stone dropped into a still pond, knowing the ripples would be impossible to ignore. At first, nothing happened. I went to bed with my phone on silent, unsure whether I felt anxious or excited, or somewhere in the purgatory between. But the next morning, the messages started, slow at first, then quickening. A private message from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in a while saying, "That donation was incredible. Didn't know you were that involved with those causes. Good for you." A comment from an old high school friend. "What a beautiful thing to do. You're amazing." And then finally, the one I was waiting for. My mother's name lighting up on my phone, her number calling twice in a row like she always does when she's too angry to wait for a response. I didn't pick up, not because I was avoiding her, but because I needed her to stew for just a little longer, to sit in that moment of confusion and fury, trying to figure out how to spin something that had already taken on a life of its own. But the voicemail was gold. Her voice, tight with restrained rage, accusing me of embarrassing the family, of weaponizing charity, and most deliciously, of sabotaging Ryan's image. She said, "Danielle, I don't know what this little stunt was supposed to accomplish, but I hope you're proud of yourself because people are talking, and not kindly." That line repeated in my head for hours. People are talking, and not kindly. I almost laughed out loud, because for once, they weren't talking about Ryan. They weren't praising my mother's perfect planning or gushing over another curated birthday bash. They were talking about me, about something I had done. And while it wasn't praise in the way they liked it, it was attention rooted in truth. And for once, they couldn't control the narrative. And that, to me, was priceless. I didn't need a helicopter ride. I didn't need a cake. I just needed to remind them I wasn't invisible. And now the whole town knew it. There are certain voices you can recognize, not just by tone or pitch, but by the particular shape they take when they're soaked in fury, that tight, brittle quality that sounds like the edge of glass, where every syllable threatens to cut. And my mother, Susan Carter, had long since mastered that art of sounding calm and furious at the exact same time. When I finally returned her call, because even though I wanted to let her stew longer, I knew delaying would only escalate her theatrics. I pressed the phone to my ear with the kind of resigned patience you only develop after years of absorbing the kind of emotional manipulation that's always dressed in pearls and served with a smile. And I braced myself for the familiar storm disguised as maternal concern. She didn't waste time on greetings or questions, skipping the pleasantries like someone tossing appetizers off the table to get straight to the meat of the argument. And when she launched in, it was with the kind of breathless outrage that would have been laughable if it hadn't been so well rehearsed. "Danielle, I'm still trying to understand what you were thinking," she began, her voice clipped and sharp, as if she were speaking through clenched teeth. "Donating that kind of money without consulting anyone, using our names on something so politically volatile." It was astonishing, really, how quickly she'd reduced a charitable act into a tactical attack. How her instinct wasn't to ask why I had done it, or whether I was okay, but to demand clarification on how she looked because of it. And while I could have responded in 100 different ways, some justified, some petty, all well within my right, I chose silence for a beat too long, just long enough to make her uncomfortable, to remind her that she didn't have control over this conversation. When I finally spoke, I kept my voice calm, conversational even, as if we were discussing something as mundane as the weather. "It was my birthday, Mom," I said slowly and clearly, "and I wanted to do something meaningful. I thought honoring my family's values was a good way to start." That silence, the one that followed my words, was not passive, it was volcanic. I could feel the pressure building behind the receiver, the tension of a woman who was used to orchestrating every social cue, every polite fiction, suddenly realizing the script had been rewritten without her permission. She exhaled through her nose, an audible, disdainful breath, and when she spoke again, her voice had shifted, colder now, more controlled. "You knew what you were doing," she said, "and there was no question in it, only accusation. You wanted to humiliate us." And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before, not just about her, but about the way I had allowed myself to move through our family like a ghost. Always polite, always smiling, always making excuses for being left out, for being forgotten, as if it were my job to be low maintenance so that others could shine uninterrupted. Because the truth was, she wasn't mad about the donation itself. She was mad that I had claimed space, that I had done something unignorable, something that couldn't be quietly erased or reframed into another chapter of Ryan's success story. "What would you have preferred?" I asked her, my voice still calm, still composed. "Another quiet birthday? Another year of pretending it doesn't matter because Ryan's getting a helicopter ride and a cake shaped like his career?" She didn't answer, not directly. Instead, she pivoted, like she always does when the emotional truth threatens to expose her curated reality. "You've always had a flair for the dramatic, Danielle. You think this makes you the bigger person, but it just shows how petty you've become." It was almost impressive. The way she twisted my refusal to stay silent into evidence of moral failure. I could have hung up, I could have screamed, but instead I did what she had never expected. I started laughing, not maniacally, not mockingly, but quietly, almost sadly, because it had taken me 38 years to see her clearly, and now that I had, the illusion was gone forever. "Petty would have been keying your car," I told her. "Petty would have been crashing Ryan's party and making a scene. This was strategic and honest. And the only thing I regret is that it took me this long to do it." There was a pause again, heavier this time, because we both knew this conversation wasn't about the donation anymore. It was about the unraveling of a narrative she'd spent years constructing. One where I was the quiet daughter who didn't need celebration, who was content to exist on the sidelines, nodding approvingly at every spotlight they pointed elsewhere. She didn't say goodbye, just ended the call with a muttered, "We'll talk later," which we both knew meant she needed time to regroup, to figure out how to spin the fallout, how to wrangle Ryan into playing the role of the wounded sibling and cast me, once again, as the difficult one. But I didn't care, not anymore. Because just a few minutes later, the family group chat started buzzing. First it was Ryan, predictably defensive, writing in all caps like a teenager. "You really did that on purpose. Who does that to their own family?" Then came the others, an aunt asking if I was okay, a cousin trying to play peacemaker, someone else chiming in with vague references to keeping things private. And me, I didn't respond. I left every message on read, sipping coffee as my phone vibrated itself into a tantrum, knowing full well that silence, when timed correctly, can be louder than any speech. What none of them seemed to realize, what they still didn't get, was that this wasn't about money. It wasn't even about birthdays. It was about being seen. It was about calling out a lifetime of being edited out of the picture and finally refusing to keep smiling from the sidelines. And this time, I wasn't stepping back. There's something eerie about standing in the home you grew up in, surrounded by walls that still hold the ghosts of your childhood voice, stair creaks that remember the way your feet used to race, photo frames that have long since stopped adding new memories of you, and realizing, with a clarity so sharp it almost feels like a betrayal, that you were never truly seen in that space, only positioned, like a prop in someone else's show. Walking through that front door again, after the week of silence and chaos that followed the donation post, was not an act of reconciliation nor a peace offering, but a deliberate confrontation with the history I had once swallowed whole to keep the illusion alive. I didn't come looking for a fight. I came to end the quiet war that had been waged under the surface for years, the one where my needs had always been the expendable ones, where my presence was tolerated but never celebrated, where love was conditional and attention had a price. My mother opened the door herself, which was unusual. She usually waited in the kitchen, busying herself with something performative like slicing fruit she had no intention of serving, so I took it as a sign that she, too, had come prepared for a confrontation. Her expression was carefully neutral, lips tight, eyes already scanning mine for some sign of weakness she could latch onto, twist, and mold into something less threatening to her worldview. Behind her, I could see my father, standing in the hallway, looking like a man who had wandered into a war zone with no idea which side he was supposed to be on. And Ryan, of course Ryan was there, leaning casually against the counter like the king of the court, waiting to be vindicated, waiting to play victim in a play he believed would once again cast him as the wronged party, the misunderstood sibling whose only sin was being adored too much. I didn't sit when my mother gestured to the dining table. I remained standing, my hands loose at my sides, my bag still slung over one shoulder because I wanted them to feel the imbalance, the shift in energy, the reminder that this wasn't a dinner party or a family talk. It was an audit, a reckoning, a truth long overdue. "I didn't come here to apologize," I said, not cruelly, not loudly, but with enough firmness that the temperature in the room dropped by a degree. "And I didn't come to explain myself either. You've had my number my entire life. You just chose not to use it." My mother flinched slightly, not in offense, but in recognition, because she knew I wasn't just talking about phones or birthdays. I was talking about years of missed calls that were never made, events I was excluded from under the guise of forgetfulness, conversations I was left out of, until the outcomes were already decided. I was talking about being the backup plan, the afterthought, the insurance policy of emotional labor that was never reciprocated. "You embarrassed us, Danielle," she said finally, her voice cracking in the middle, like the tension had found its first fault line. "You dragged our names into something political and polarizing, and you did it knowing exactly how it would make us look." "No," I corrected, still standing, still calm. "What I did was give $10,000 to a cause that saves lives. What embarrassed you was the reflection staring back at you when it wasn't one you could control." Ryan rolled his eyes, muttering something under his breath. Something about therapy or attention-seeking or me being dramatic. And I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly predictable, so exactly the kind of dismissal he had always used to avoid taking responsibility. My father opened his mouth once, as if to interject, but then he closed it again, which was fitting. He had been silent for years, so why start now? You could have talked to us, my mother said, her voice softening in that strategic way she always used when logic had failed her, shifting gears to guilt like a well-oiled machine. You didn't have to make it public. I did talk to you, I said, leaning in just slightly. Every year I didn't say anything was me talking. Every quiet moment, every polite smile, every time I let it go and gave you the benefit of the doubt, that was me trying. This was the first time I stopped pretending. There was no shouting, no tears, just an air so thick with things unsaid that it was almost hard to breathe. And I could see, finally, that they were no longer in control of the story. My silence had been the fuel to their comfort for years, and now, without it, they didn't know how to respond. I'm not here to ask for a place at this table anymore, I said as I turned to leave, my voice steady. You've had years to offer me a seat, and all I ever got was the folding chair in the corner. I've built my own damn table now. As I stepped out the front door, into the cool air that hit like a baptism, I felt no relief, no catharsis, no cinematic swell of pride or closure. What I felt was something quieter, something deeper, a clean break, not from my family, but from the role I'd been given within it. From the choreography of pretending everything was okay as long as I smiled hard enough and didn't ask for too much. I walked away not because I hated them, but because I finally understood that being family doesn't give people permission to treat you like you're optional. And while the fallout wasn't finished, while the group chat would surely buzz again with sideways apologies and veiled attempts to reset the narrative, I would no longer be the one shrinking to keep their comfort intact. Maybe they'll learn from it. Maybe they won't. Maybe they'll remember my next birthday. Maybe they'll skip it again. But either way, I won't be waiting for a seat at their table. Not when I finally built one where I get to sit at the head.